Convene the Dublin City Council meeting of Monday, April the 9th. Jane, could you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, I have a proclamation to read regarding Earth Day and Earth Month. Here it goes. Whereas Earth Day is an annual event celebrated on April the 22nd, which helps to raise awareness about environmental issues while promoting sustainable habits to protect resources in our community. And whereas a sound natural environment is the foundation of a healthy society and a robust economy. And whereas a sustainable environment can be achieved through educational efforts, public policy, and community advocacy, and whereas it is the city's desire to conserve resources and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, waste, litter, and pollution, and whereas the city aspires to protect the public health and welfare, including that of wildlife, vegetation, streams, and rivers, all of which enhance the quality of life for our community, and whereas coordinated efforts can help enhance environmental wellness and help build a healthy community, and whereas during the month of April, the City of Dublin will offer an organic gardening and composting program, household waste collection, and Arbor Day event providing free tree seedlings, and Earth Day volunteer service project to plant a new pollinator garden. Now, therefore, I, Gregory S. Peterson, Mayor of the City of Dublin, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2018 as Earth Month and encourage the support of green initiatives throughout Dublin, Ohio, and for others to undertake similar actions. Signed this 9th day of April 2018. And Matthew, I think you're the proud recipient of our proclamation. And I also brought, who's the appropriate person to talk about today?
I can speak to it a little bit. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, members of council. Earth Month, we started doing Earth Month instead of Earth Day because there's just not enough days in a month to be able to do Earth stuff. So we have, every day of the week, our staff, our team is amazing. They come to work every day, and a lot of them are set out to do just that, is protect the environment, whether it's the programming that we're providing or just the management and the of the natural resources in the city. So. This month, in the proclamation, Mayor mentioned a few events that we're going to have. All three will be held on April 21st, one of which was mentioned. Our horticulture team will be leading a group of volunteers at Red Trayview to establish a pollinator garden and to plant some new native species down there in that site. We also have our forestry team that will be at Amberley neighborhood at the shelter at Amberley Park, and they will be there to answer questions to any residents about trees, the pruning processes, and the proper mulching techniques and so forth. And they'll also be handing out free seedlings for residents, so I encourage everybody to go. The hazardous disposal, household hazardous waste disposal will be on that same day as well, April 21st. It'll be from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Ashland campus. That's 5200 Emerald Parkway. Blazer Parkway. So encourage everybody to go out and get rid of those hazardous materials in their house. So thank you.
Excellent.
Matt, I have one question for you. I was going to bring it up in the items of interest, but since you brought up the Solid Waste Authority folks, last year we had a lot of problems with that collection, and we received several comments that weren't glowing about it. Have we resolved the issues that were problematic for us last year for this year?
I'll address that one if you don't mind.
Sure.
The household hazardous waste collection did experience issues last year. I think it was one of those anomaly years where we had a lot more people turn out than we had been having the year before. So Megan informed me that through our agreement with the Solid Waste Authority, we're adding a second lane to process that, kind of like we used to do, but when the numbers went down, they took that away. The numbers went up. Now we're putting it back. So we probably won't need that second lane after I hope we do. I hope we need a third lane. I hope
we need them
bringing
all.
their material
Get that stuff out of the
So,
environment.
but we are addressing that way.
Great. Thank you.
So the other question that I have is, I know there were several complaints about people bringing paint cans because that's not part of household hazardous waste. So it might be a good idea maybe to do just a little bit of some social media around where they can go get the information from SWACO's website on what is household hazardous waste and what is not. Because they'll have to pay for paint cans when they bring the paint cans.
We'll try to
We'll do
clarify.
that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. National Citizen Survey results. Marty.
Actually, I think Sue's going to do, Mayor, a quick introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Sue.
But Marty's here.
Marty's here.
Good evening, members of council. A few results from the 2018 National Citizen Survey were presented at the State of the Community last month, and we promised you full results and a presentation at tonight's council meeting. We promised, we have representatives from the National Research Center and also Marty Saperstein from Saperstein and Associates. You should have received an email from Dana last week with links to the full survey results and data, which are now posted to our website. We hope you will find the data in the reports to be a lot more meaningful after the presentations tonight. So a little background on the National Citizen Survey. Every 2 to 3 years, we participate in this national survey to measure resident perceptions of livability, governance, and city services. The standardized survey administered by the National Research Center also allows us to benchmark our results and compare them to other cities across the country. The cost of the survey, including the custom section, is just under $17,000. Along with the standardized questions, each community is given the opportunity to customize one page of questions. These questions can help determine community priorities and gauge residents' opinion on city initiatives. For benchmarking purposes, some of our customized questions were the same as previous years to measure perceptions and trends. I know you are interested in hearing the results, so I would like to introduce these presenters. Morgan Adams is the research associate from the National Research Center in Fort Collins, Colorado. This is her first visit to Dublin. She actually spent the weekend here. She wanted to see what Dublin was made of after the results. And she will be presenting the 2018 survey results. Marty Saperstein from Saperstein and Associates, a research firm here in Columbus, will be presenting the findings from the City of Dublin custom questions, including the open-ended question on the Bridge Street District. Marty has had a lot of past experience with the City of Dublin as he has been involved in assessing National Citizen Survey results and has administered Dublin's community attitude surveys, which take a deeper, more comprehensive dive into residents' opinions and satisfaction on a myriad of topics and community issues. So I'm going to turn it over to Morgan, who will give her presentation, followed by Marty. And we decided that if you could wait until both of them presented to ask questions, and they're ready for your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Welcome, Morgan.
Well, thank you.
What'd you think of Dublin?
I think it's great.
Great.
Even the roundabout.
Heard about that, did you?
So as Sue mentioned, my name is Morgan Adams, and I'm a research associate with the National Research Center, and I'm here to present to you your 2018 National Citizen Survey results. So the presentation itself is actually centered around the full set of reports that I'm sure all of you have memorized at this point. But for those of you who haven't, I'm going to go through those results and also give you a little bit of background about the NCS and our methodology. And as I said, we'll have time at the end for questions. But if you have any as we're going along about any of some pertinent items, please just let me know. So the National Citizen Survey, or the NCS as we like to call it, is a turnkey templatized survey that was developed jointly between our company, NRC, and the ICMA. Now, because it's templatized, this allows us to keep the cost low for you, but it also provides us with the greatest amount of data for benchmarking purposes. We've done this survey with over 400 communities across the United States, and we have over 600 jurisdictions in that national benchmarking database that we can compare to. And because we've been in the citizen survey research field for over 20 years for local governments, what we've done in our research is determine that there are what we call these three main pillars that make up community livability. And you'll see here that they are community characteristics, governance, and participation. So within each of these 3 pillars, we've derived 8 facets for models of community livability. You can see this runs anywhere from safety to natural and built environments, economy, and community engagement. So you'll find that each of the survey questions that we asked can be further categorized into these 8 areas. So this year was the 4th administration of the NCS. We conducted a randomized scientific sample of 1,500 households in the city, and each household received 3 mailings. And this included a pre-notification postcard to let residents know that the survey would be coming in the mail and what it was about. We also included 2 survey packets sent out a week apart. And in these cover letters that included instructions about what was going on, how they could fill out the survey and send it back, or they could go online if they wanted to and take it there. So each of these responses were also tracked based upon the 4 city wards. And this year, we got approximately 500 responses, 495. This resulted in a 4% margin of error around the results. And we also included comparisons based upon those 4 city wards to look at those results, and an open-ended question to talk more about people's impressions of the Bridge District. So as I mentioned, we have over 600 jurisdictions in the National Benchmarking Database, and so we compared your results whenever possible. And you'll notice in this presentation that I included little gold stars to denote where the city of Dublin is higher than the national average, and you're about to see a lot of stars. So, of the 140 comparisons, there were 94 that were higher, 36 that were similar, and only 4 that were lower. And to give you a little perspective about how we calculate those benchmarks, what we do is we actually make it a little bit harder for residents to rate a service or an item, quality of life, to be higher or lower, so that these items really stand out to a community as being something that's a highlight or being something that might be an area of focus in your community. So what would the calculations look like is if you are considered to be higher or lower, you are at least 10 points from that national average on either side. If you're denoted as much higher or much lower, you're more than 20 points on either side of that. So you'll see that Dublin's results really are remarkable. Compared to 2015, most of the items were stable over time. There were 6 increases and 10 decreases in 2018. And some of those decreases tend to be related to items in participation, such as conserving water. This is our honeycomb structure, and what this gives you is an overview of how all the ratings within each of those 8 facets or areas compared to the benchmarks as a whole. As you can see, all of them are higher. And we also asked residents to identify which of these 8 areas were the most essential or important to them for the city to focus on in the coming 2 years, and they chose safety and economy. So I mentioned this presentation is focused around those key findings that we have in the livability report, if you're interested. And our first key finding was that Dublin is an extremely desirable community. As you can see, nearly all respondents gave excellent or good scores to Dublin as a place to live, and this was higher than comparison communities and has been stable since 2009 when the baseline survey was conducted. A similar proportion of residents gave positive assessments to the overall quality of life and to the aspects that enhance quality of life. As you can see, almost all residents gave excellent scores to the city as a place to raise children, the overall appearance and image of the community, their neighborhoods as places to live, and all of these were higher and stable over time. And we also had about 2/3 that were happy with the city as a place to retire. So, what does this mean? Well, residents' ratings in Dublin were so positive that the community was ranked in the top 10 of our database on many aspects for your community. If you will go into your technical appendices, you don't need to do it now, you'll find that the benchmark comparison tables there will give you a ranking on each item and where you are. And just for example, you're first in economic health, employment opportunities, the city as a place to work, mental health care. You're second in as a place to raise children, those preventative healthcare services and availability of healthcare. And you're third in so many that I couldn't reasonably fit them all on this slide. So it's something to really be proud of, your rankings. So with these ratings being what they are, it's really no surprise that you have a lot of loyalty to your community from residents. About 9 in 10 indicated that they would recommend the city to anyone who might ask, and over the same amount said that they would also plan to remain in the community for the next 5 years. So not only do Dublin residents enjoy living in the city, but they also have trust in their local government, and they love the city services that are provided to them. In terms of government performance, 81% of participants gave favorable reviews to the overall direction that the city is taking, and a similar proportion gave high marks to the honesty of the government, overall confidence in the city, and the government treating all residents fairly. About 3/4 also highly rated the value of services for taxes paid and the job that the Dublin government does at welcoming citizen involvement. All of these ratings were similar to previous years and were all higher than other groups nationally. So in that relationship between residents and leadership, communication is really something that's key. So efforts to engage this community are really reflected in those government performance ratings. And so you'll see that the government community engagement is also highly rated. About 9 in 10 respondents were pleased with the information services that were provided by the City of Dublin, and 8 in 10 felt that the opportunities to volunteer or participate in community matters was excellent or good. These residents also thought very well of the open and accepting nature of the community towards people of diverse backgrounds. Once again, they're consistent over time, and they're higher than the benchmark. So we also found that 94% of residents gave high scores to the overall the overall surveys, the overall services that are provided by the city. And this has also been stable over time and higher than municipalities elsewhere. And because your government service ratings in general across those 8 areas were so positive, I decided to choose just a couple of areas to talk about in a little bit more depth because they were the ones that were the highest rated and consistently across the entire group were very positive. So those included safety and recreation and wellness. Ratings for police, fire, ambulance, crime, and fire prevention were all rated highly by at least 9 in 10, and 8 in 10 were very pleased with the animal control and emergency preparedness services. And these were also higher than national averages and similar to 2015 results. Once again, you see the same trend in recreation and wellness. 9 in 10 were very pleased with their city parks, health services. At least 8 in 10 were pleased with recreation programs, and all of these were also higher than the national benchmarks. Survey participants in Dublin were also valued their local community and emphasized continued importance and focus on this area. And once again, economy is another area in which Dublin excels. 93% felt that the overall economic health of the city was excellent or good, and all other aspects received high marks from residents, including Dublin as a place to work, business and service establishments, employment opportunities, and the city as a place to visit, as well as shopping opportunities. And once again, all of these are higher than the benchmark. Economic development was also a highlight, with 87% awarding high marks. And the attributes that impact residents' perceptions of local economy were also positive. About 8 in 10 indicated that they were not under housing cost stress, and they were pleased with the new development in the community, and 7 in 10 thought highly of the variety of housing options. Now, ratings for new development were higher in 2018, and they're returning close to the levels that we saw in 2009. And actually, fewer residents are under housing cost stress than we've ever seen in the community based upon results that go back to 2009. So that's an excellent sign. We did see that the variety of housing options were lower than previous survey administrations. Compared to 2015, scores for employment opportunities have increased from the previous high of 74%, excellent or good. And we also found that residents reported higher levels of optimism about the impact that the local economy will have on their incomes in the next 6 months. And to give this just a little bit of perspective, in 2009, that was 18% positive, which is not surprising considering the economy at that time. But even from 2015 to 2018 alone, that jumped 12 percentage points. So people are feeling very positive about their futures. As a special addition, the City of Dublin asked residents to determine if encouraging more shops and restaurants to locate within Dublin would be a priority. And we found that 46% thought it would be a high priority, and another 44% thought it would be a medium priority. So as Sue mentioned, you had quite a bit of room for some custom questions. We're going to go over those now. And those included some budget priorities, as well as the preservation of the historic district and the impressions of the Bridge Street district. Survey respondents assessed the priority level of several different potential improvements, and each option was rated at least a medium priority by a majority of residents. But we found that the top three were improving traffic flow, enhancing the riverfront for outdoor recreation, and preserving the historic district were high or medium priorities. And the lowest priorities were expanding programs at the recreation center and expanding fine arts opportunities. The city also asked residents if they agreed or disagreed that the government has been effective in preserving the character of the historic district, and 86% agreed that they had. So now for the second time, residents were able to give their impressions about the Bridge Street district. In 2015, we had 70% of respondents report that their impression of the project was very or somewhat favorable. And this year it was 87% that said the same. Now, with this question, we also gave residents the opportunity to describe in their own words why they felt the way that they did about the Bridge Street community. And many of these comments are related to the attractions that are included, the design of the area, and access. I'm not going to go into detail about that now because Marty's going to do that for me, but we can certainly talk about that in more depth. So in summary, the main takeaways from the 2018 results were that Dublin continues to be an extremely desirable community, that residents place a high level of trust on the government and think highly of city services, and that the economy in Dublin is highly valued and prioritized by residents. So to conclude, the point in conducting a citizen survey is not only to gain feedback from residents, but it's also to use that data in future decision-making processes. And it's clear to me, as it probably should be to everybody here, that the City of Dublin not only provides excellence in terms of quality of life aspects and service delivery, but you're really dedicated to incorporating the voices of the residents that you serve, and you continue to make the City of Dublin a world-class city. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Appreciate it.
All right, Matt.
So, congratulations. Those numbers are pretty strong. And while I am not even remotely surprised at them, I am not any less mindful of how difficult it is to achieve them. So you should at least pat yourself on the back a little bit. This year, as in 2015, working with the NCS folks, we got to include some custom questions, and you saw a little bit about them already, and I wanted to provide a little, I think of it as local color. And we included in those questions, again, questions on the Bridge Street district. And if you think about 2015, the Bridge Street district in 2015 was a lot of dirt and some renderings. And today, much of it stands. So it makes the timing of this really appropriate, really helpful to see, now that you've built what was just on paper, to get a feel for how the community feels. So we asked the same question that we did in 2015, which was favorable, unfavorable, let people choose among the 4 categories. And what we see is that 44% said very favorable, 43% said somewhat favorable, and then a combined 13% said unfavorable. This is a very atypical distribution of satisfaction data. Typically, that second column, that somewhat favorable bar, that's the high bar, followed by the very favorable second high, followed by the third bar, which is the somewhat unfavorable, third lowest, and the very unfavorable would be the lowest. That would be what I expect. But here we see that 87%, almost 9 out of 10, have a favorable impression of the Bridge Street District. Where were we when the Bridge Street District was dirt? And what we see is that now we have the shape of the curve that I just described. The red bars reflect Dublin at its optimistic. People listening to what the Bridge Street District would become, give you the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, it seems like it's going to be a good thing. But if you notice, the very favorable bar is short. What's remarkable about these data is that all those somewhat favorables in the blue bar, in the red bar in 2015, now are in the blue bar in 2018. So there's a 16 percentage point increase in very favorable. I can count how many times I've seen a change like that over a 3-year period on my thumb. That is unusual, coupled with the fact that the overall total went up. It's not much, but it went up. And if you add the unfavorables declined from 21% to only 13%. And again, you've got the 16 percentage point bump. So it's from optimistic Dublin to realistic Dublin. They're now evaluating something that exists. So this is not what it could be. This is what it is. Unlike 2015, we got to ask an open-ended question. And the open-ended question simply said, please explain why you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion, impression of the Bridge Street District. No clues, completely open-ended. And so what that means is that interviewers, if we do it on the phone, but people with pencils writing it in, and then Morgan's staff took all those open-ended comments and coded them by hand, I'm assuming, right? Coded them by hand, one by one, and distributed them into categories. And those categories are this. So the first category was attractions, and that had to do with people commenting on restaurants, entertainment, food, nightlife, all that kind of stuff, shopping. And the second category was design, and this had to do with look and feel of the Bridge Street District, a lot of sort of feely-weely stuff, not very objective, mostly subjective. Like what it looks like, don't like what it looks like. And then the third category had to do with access, traffic, parking, those sorts of issues. The fourth was quality of life. The fifth was about people. The sixth was about economics. So all of that got tallied up, but it got tallied up into positive comments and then negative comments and then like mixed comments. So I wanted to take a look to see what was driving these 87% of the people to say, yeah, this is a great place. So I looked at the different categories and I said, what are the two most popular categories of comments for the positive? And what I learned was attractions. That came up by 15% of the total number of respondents. And that was people commenting on the new restaurants and stores and sort of the physical infrastructure that was entertainment kind of related. And then design, they were making comments about the design of the Bridge Street District. And then I said, well, what are the two most common categories on the negative side? And, well, the most popular one was design and access. So access, a lot of people talking about, will be no surprise to you, talking about the roundabout, and people talking about parking on Riverside Drive, and they get out of the car and all sorts of horrible things could happen. But it just struck me as incredibly interesting that the number of positive design subjective comments matched, not the number, but the percentage of positive comments. So it made me want to go back and read what's going on here. And I recommend that you all read the open-ended comments. They're just fun to read. So that's what really caught my attention. And so I went back and I said, well, let's see what's going on. And so somebody said, it's very nice looking, I'm unhappy with the modern design, it's kind of ugly, it's charming, I mean, all sorts of things. Looks great, I hate the look. Oh, it's bland and generic. Oh, it's visually appealing. No, it's too modern. No, it's classy looking. No, it looks like military condo. I mean, all sorts of things got said that were from very positive to obviously very negative, all about the design. So I thought, what's going on here? Is there some pattern in the data that would help to explain this? And so the first thing I thought was, let's look at length of time people have been in Dublin to see if there's any relationship between the number of years they've been here and how they feel about the design of the Bridge Street District. And this is what I found. Oh, I had a couple more. Look at that. Okay. So if you look at the people who have been here for 5 years, only 2% had an unfavorable design comment. If you look at the people who have been here, the residents, for 6 to 10 years, 5% had an unfavorable design comment. Well, look at those 11 to 20-year people, 11%. And then the long-term residents, 29% of those people had a design comment that was negative. So just think about this. Does that mean all of the people who fancy themselves architects or have been here for a long time and are making really serious, I'm like Gary and there should have been more aluminum there? I don't think so. I think that most of that are people who are reflecting. They don't like it because it doesn't look like Dublin looks. If you've been here for 5 years, you don't know what Dublin used to look like. If you've been here for 20 years, you do know what Dublin looks like. And I think for many people, what's on the other side of the river is inconsistent with what they think Dublin is, for good or for not good. That's what they think. So I thought, well, let's test this theory. Would we find differences like this across other variables? And there's, before we even go on, so I thought, well, what about the distribution for positive comments? And that doesn't hold up so much. So those numbers across the bottom, the 2, 5, 11, and 29, would be 14, 13, 18, and 11. So positive comments didn't have that same relationship as did the negative comments. Even more reason to think that people were unhappy with the difference between Old Dublin and the Bridge Street District. So then I said, okay, well, what else can we look at to see if this relationship holds? And when I looked at gender, there was no difference between men and women. Men and women were equally likely to think the design was good or think the design was bad. Then I thought, oh, we have this other question about the historic district. Let's see what people think of that. And here we see, this was a statement that I wanted people to agree or disagree with. So it says, the city of Dublin has been effective in preserving the character of Dublin's historic district, and what we see is that 86% agreed with that statement, 36% strongly, and half moderately. So what's the next thing you want to know? Is, well, how'd that stack up relative to tenure in the city? And here you can see a very similar pattern. Of the new folks, 5 years or less, 94% said, oh yeah, doing a great job. Of the senior residents, meaning they've been here for more than 20 years, only 72% said that. So those numbers all the way down are high, still a lot of support, but it does show you that there's a relationship between how long folks have been here and how satisfied they are with Bridge Street District's design as well as with maintaining preservation. And interestingly, the relationship between age and these two questions, which you would think would be correlated some, is correlated some, but not nearly as strong as the relationship with the number of years they've been in town, which is really what you would expect. All right. So then we had questions on priorities, and these were 7 initiatives that we asked folks to tell us, should this be a high priority, a medium priority, or a low priority? And as Morgan hinted at, actually she showed you, improving the flow of traffic was the number one. At 58% said, that's a high priority. I do this to keep you in suspense, so you won't be reading ahead of me. Enhance the riverfront, yeah, 56%, virtually identical. Encouraging more shops and restaurants, 46%. Preserve the historic district, now you're down in the 30s. Additional parkland. Expanding programs at the community center. And this one always pains me at the end because it's so low. Expanding the number of fine arts opportunities. And I was saying to Sue like 10 minutes before the meeting started that every time my wife and I pass the field of corn, we can't not say, field of corn, field of corn. So, you know, more public art for our house. So I was looking at the 58% and I thought, so how much of that is a function of the Bridge Street District? Because the roundabouts in, and I mean, you can read the open ends to get a sense of what people feel about it. So I went back to, not the NCS, but the Community Attitude Survey to 2016, and it was only 4 items, not 7. But improving the flow of traffic was on that questionnaire also. And then in 2016, it was 66%, actually higher than this, which isn't all that surprising because there are 7 items to choose from here and there's only 4 items to choose from there. So then I went back to 2013 where we had a similar question with 9 items, not 7 or 4, but 9. And traffic still ranked first, and that number was 57%, which is virtually identical to this. So it leaves you thinking that it's not that traffic is a new problem, traffic is still a problem. And it would be, I guess, fair to say that the roundabout has not changed perceptions for the better. And you'll form a more realistic conclusion when you read the comments for yourself. Okay, then we asked just a few questions on internet service providers, and we had folks evaluate speed, customer service, and cost. And what we learned is oh so not surprising. So half of the residents, well, about half said speed for uploading and downloading is either good or excellent, and customer service, about half said either good or excellent. But when it comes to value, not so much, right? So you got about 3 and 10 said excellent or good, with 30% saying poor compared to 16% and 15%. So then we said, okay, what do you want done? And say, well, what change, if any, would you make? And what you can see is that all of a sudden speed and customer service, yeah, not really that important relative to cost. So if ISPs were to do anything, lower cost would make people happier, presumably. You're surprised, I can tell. As opposed to better customer service or speed. Then I ran out of custom questions. All right. So come back. Questions for either.
Questions from council? Chris?
I find your longevity in the community take kind of interesting. Mine is a highly unscientific perspective, but the folks that have lived here for 5 years or less, or even, I think your next was 8 years or less?
6 to 10.
6 to 10, okay. I think those people are the folks that maybe are the least likely to envision themselves here for more than, it's not as important to them because they don't vision themselves here for that long. That tends to be, I look at my kids and their friend groups. They either are families that move. If, a new kid comes in, oh, well, we lived in Peoria, Illinois, and we lived here, and we lived there, and now we live in Dublin, and presumably they'll have multiple more stops versus the folks that have been here longer, really call Dublin home and intend to call it home for a long period of time. So that was kind of interesting to me. I think I hung a tag on that more, that it was more of a transient kind of family versus one that intended to be multi-generational in the same community.
It's certainly a testable proposition, but some portion of those maybe transients will stay in. I mean, the people who have been here for 20 years were once here for 5 years.
Yeah.
And so they stayed. So some portion will leave, some portion.
It's kind of interesting that the author of a lot of what happened in Bridge Street District was done by people on this council, most of which I would say lived here probably well in excess of 20 years. I know I've been here since 1978. John, you've been here a while. Greg? I just think that's an interesting perspective in terms of, to me, it substantiates what we did.
And the other thing that I'll say about that trend, I'm not making a value judgment about it. I'm just telling you what it is. It's you can choose to deal with it any way you want, but it is, I think, worth knowing that there is a curve relative to residency and its appeal. So where will those people be in 20 years? The people who have been here for 20 years. Not exactly clear, right? The people who have been here for 10 years might be here for 20 years down the line. So when you think about, the interesting thing to me is when you think about the origins of the Bridge Street District, I mean, I don't live in the community. I'm like in the community south. That shall go unnamed. It seemed to me, in talking with Sue and Terry in the development of it, two of the goals I thought were to provide a place for empty nesters to come, so that 66% of not a great place to retire, which 66% is like really low compared to everything else. So that number can change with the development of the Bridge Street District, so people who leave the community can stay, and then, we want more like millennials to come. We don't want them to move out. So it's not as if the Bridge Street District evolved just because some developer wanted it to. You had thought about changing the community in a way that kept people in. And it could well be that some people who have been here for a long time have no plans to downsize, don't have any interest in younger people moving back, will be unhappy. It's hard to do something that makes everybody happy. But you already knew that.
I have a question. It was so glowing, and it's great, and we should pat ourselves on the back. It's a great community. We all know that. But to make it better, we have to know what we don't do as well. And so I would ask you, what were the lower than average, or where are the areas that you think that we should take a look at?
That's a great question. And I think that, we've seen just a few, as we mentioned, lower. I think it's important to understand the context of this. If we're seeing kind of a decrease, maybe in one item from 2015 to 2018, but it might be similar to a level that we've seen previous, I don't think that it's something that should shoot out at you as a big priority, especially if it's not one that you've already been thinking about, because it's not really a trend line yet, right? We don't know whether or not that dip is just something that is naturally occurring, or if it's something that they're actually perceiving that the service is worse over time. So I think that's one thing to kind of think about, is that not just because something's gone down does it mean that it necessitates a big change or drive, to improve that type of service, if that makes sense.
I just wanted to ask you one other thing. I'd also want to, second part of the question, is there anything that over the period of time we've been surveying has stayed at a lower level that we haven't been able to lift? Even though I realize that, some of the below aren't that low, but everybody wants to improve where they can.
Sure. So you can find that in the trends report. What we do is we kind of break it down based upon all the different years and what they look like, and if they're similar to the previous years before that. So like we talked about a little bit, there's a margin of error around the different results. So I think sometimes, you see, well, we were 98%, last year, we're 96% now, but because that margin of error is 4%, you can't say that there's a difference there, because statistically there's not. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that margin of error. But some of the lower ratings that we were seeing are pretty typical of communities that see success. So like the variety of housing options, the availability of affordable housing, even traffic flow, mobility issues, those all tend to start to see a little bit of a decline when a community is very desirable. And those are just kind of the pitfalls of success, is what we like to call them. So it's not necessarily something that it needs a lot of effort on your part to fix. It's something that happens naturally. It's a trend across the U.S. So I think it's great that, like Marty said, you're kind of bringing in those different kinds of housing, especially all the new development that's going on. You're kind of thinking about what people want in the future, regardless of demographic. So I think it's always great to make sure that you're including all of the different income levels that there might be, so that housing can be there for them. But those are types of things that you're just probably going to see decrease, and there's probably not much you can do about it, only because you're already so great.
Was that lower than average? Did we have anything that was lower than average?
You only had 4 items that were lower than the benchmark. Let me find them. Let's see here. Find my notes. They tended to be related to participation in the community. Things like attending meetings, things like that. So let me check here. Seem to have lost it. I think we've mixed our notes. But those are what they were related to, was participation in general.
Okay. Thank you.
So can I weigh in on that? Sure. So for me, there's 2 big lessons you can take away. One is, what aren't we doing well that we should do better? But an equally important lesson to me is, when you look at those results, the message I think ought to be, in part anyway, keep doing what you're doing. And that doesn't mean physically the same things. It means be as thoughtful and responsive and reflective and plan. I mean, all of the mechanical things of running a community, you apparently are doing well. You should keep doing them. And I say that because it's easy when the numbers are so high to sit back and say, hey, we've got this mastered. Well, you might, but it doesn't happen on its own. It happens because you make it happen. And that's not to be lost on you.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question about participation. I'm sort of curious. I represent a quarter of the city, roughly, and another association is very closed and controlled in how it operates. But over the years, we had that same problem about participation. And then in the end, after we've done surveys, we found out that everybody's very happy here. So they really don't want to participate in a lot of this busy stuff. Is that a realistic analysis of people's views on things?
Look, the survey to some extent imposes our values on the respondents, right, when we interpret it. We all believe, yeah, participation is good. It's America. Can't do this everywhere. But it doesn't mean people want to participate any more than they already are. So you can beat them up the head to try to make them participate, but that might not make them happy or the community better.
Yeah, it seems like if everything's rolling along, they just don't want to be bothered with it. They're more interested in what's for dinner, what are we doing this weekend, and what soccer game am I going to? And I don't want to be hassled with this other stuff because I really don't have that level of complaint attitude about being involved in all this superficial stuff. And you're representing me, so I expect you to do the job for me because that's why you're out there doing your thing.
If you ask people like a police-related question, everybody wants good policing, except maybe the crooks, but everybody wants it. Participation is not necessarily like that. It's a sort of a different dimension. So it's good to know. I mean, maybe it gets to a point so low it's worrisome, or people become unhappy about things because they haven't been participating, and then you point that out to them, and then maybe they start participating. But when things are, I mean, there was a political scientist, E.E. Schatzsnyder, and he used to say not voting is great. This not voting meant the populace was happy. That people only really vote when they're unhappy. So he wasn't just concerned about lack of participation in democracy's most fundamental way, voting.
Well, I think a great example, too, from your results, like, for instance, people stock supplies for an emergency at rates that were lower. And that's a really good example of something that's not necessarily a bad thing. That just means that you're not having a lot of emergencies that are making people think, I have to have supplies, because it's not something that's really in your community. You know, it's the Florida communities that we tend to see really high ratings on those because they know it's coming. You know, but for your community, you know, necessarily those emergencies are not occurring.
A consistent lower score that we've gotten as a community is a good place to retire. It's kind of like no kidding. I mean, if I could change the weather, let's work on that one. But I mean, that's an example of one that's been consistently lower, right? But what can we do about that to make Dublin more competitive about being a good place to retire? And so the aging in place stuff and those things that have raised our consciousness about that. I mean, these are things that we've been working on for a while, and I would say probably are a result of some of the feedback we've had through this survey over the years and showing those trends. And even though we do well, and we do really well against the benchmark, against other communities, you know, our low is our low. It's all relative to us, and we don't have to accept that everything is high and it doesn't need to be worked on. I worry about the 2% that's not happy. That's tends to be how I'm wired, but that's just me. So.
You know, to that point, I did read all the open ends because I just love that stuff. And it was really interesting to your point about what's actionable. If you go through those open ends, there's some very consistent themes, as Marty sort of highlighted in there. So I think there are some very actionable things. I mean, the roundabout needs attention. We need to do something, and that was probably number one in that list. I'm looking at Marty. So again, I think in that, and thank you for doing the open-ended question on this, because I think it really does allow you to then see what are those things that we can take action on and do something. Because while you have to keep on doing things, when the city gets bigger, the degree of difficulty of doing that, it grows, right? It's just
so in interest of like
part of
fairness,
the way it is.
Kathy and I had a long, councilwoman, I guess, had a really like an hour and a half long conversation one day, and we talked about, so when people say they like or don't like the Bridge Street District, what are they referring to? What does that really mean? We went back and forth, but at the end of like literally an hour and a half, we decided, let's find out. So if you think about it, there isn't another open-ended question on this survey, but this seemed important enough, and you guys were gracious enough to code it.
And thank you for doing that.
Include it. So,
yeah, because I think it gave us the flavor of, because Marty and I did have quite a discussion about this, as you can tell. We like to debate these things. But if it was just on paper before, that was a very discussion, is that when you're looking at in previous years, what you see is a picture, right? And now it's real. So let's find out what they like and don't like about that realness. And so I so appreciate that flavor, because I do believe there's some actionable things. I did have a question. The demographics that you shared a little bit about tenure in the community, age, et cetera, so forth. I know one of the things that we really is really important to the community is making sure the community remains attractive to millennials as well as retirees. Do we have other demographic splits? And did I miss that in the data, or is there not enough? Can we see this by age, favorability, and things like that?
So I had an in at the Bridge Street at the NCS.
Oh, you had an in.
I asked for those.
Oh, you asked for those. So
yes.
we didn't. Do we have enough to be statistically significant to see that?
Yes.
Can we see that?
Yes. Yeah, we can actually produce an entire report that breaks down each of the different respondents based on your demographics. So,
because I think that would be interesting, because millennials are important about their look on economy, jobs, and things like that. So I think there might be, I don't know what this is going to cost us, but I think there might be some yeah, as we dig down here, I think there might be some real treasure troves for actionability or.
Yeah, I think
So
that's great.
thank
I
you.
appreciate that. And, you know, what we don't want is for this thing to lie on a shelf. Right. And we really want to, for those who like to do that, and I'll hire these guys to do it more for us. But so to your point, yeah, we'd be happy to do that. But the point is, we want to leverage the data, make sure we're spending time with it. And obviously, this is the highest level view that we could give, and there's lots of opportunity to get really deep into it. But I would ask if you have, as you get time, we're supposed to review all this and have it under your belt by tonight, but as you get time to review it, spend time with it, and then goes for our public as well. You have questions, we can certainly delve into those, and that suggestion will certainly.
Yeah, and I think on certain areas, it's going to be really important for us.
So
Thank you.
let's leverage it and use it.
Just one last thing on that. So don't lose sight of the fact when you read the open ends. There are certainly actionable things. Don't lose sight of the fact that 87% have favorable impressions. And why that's important, because if 47% have favorable impressions, I would recommend acting more quickly. You're not hemorrhaging support for the Bridge Street District. So there are clearly actionable things. The roundabout is one, parking on Riverside Drive is another. I mean, they just pop off the page. But you have the time and goodwill to come up with a solution that's right, as opposed to some Band-Aid that doesn't work in the long run.
So one really quick question. Remind me again how the respondents are selected?
So they're randomly selected.
From what pool?
So we do it from your entire household pool. So what happens is we purchase a list from the USPS, and they update that list of residents every 3 months. And then we geocode that based upon your boundaries to ensure everyone's within that household.
Gotcha. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Marty. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Morgan, for coming in.
Mayor, if I could, I just want to acknowledge and say my thanks as you have to Morgan and Marty. I also want to thank our Public Information Office, Sue and her staff, for managing this through. It's a lot of work put in place. I just wanted to thank everyone for all the great work.
And for the residents to fill that out, because those things take, how long?
Probably a good 20 minutes.
Yeah,
Oh, that's right.
so,
I forget how painful that can be when you get that.
yeah.
Oh, it's good,
and the
though.
response rate was
Keep
good at
answering.
34, wasn't it? That's a
Absolutely.
great response
It
rate.
is.
So thanks to the community for doing that, because that is so helpful.
Great, thank you very much. Citizen comments, no one signed in. Is there anybody here that forgot to sign in or didn't realize they needed to sign in? I don't see any hands, so we will move right along. Onto the consent agenda. Does anyone on council wish to remove the 2 items that are currently on the consent agenda? Hearing none, I would move that we approve the 2 items that are on the consent agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ann?
Mr. Keenan? Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Introduction, first readings ordinances, ordinance 28-18. Ann?
Amending the annual appropriations for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2018.
David, welcome.
Good evening, members of council. This ordinance would amend the 2018 appropriations. Our intent is to bring these appropriations once a quarter, so this one would have any adjustments from the first quarter since the beginning of the budget year. We have detailed explanations with each of the appropriations, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
I did hear Christina say she introduced it, Ann, didn't she?
I did.
See?
I did.
Thank you. Tim usually took care of it. Any questions from council?
I do.
Go.
Do you mind? Pardon me. In section 4, is there a little bit more detailed breakdown of the current actual contract amounts versus the originally estimated ones?
Sure, I can. The contract amounts were on the previous ordinance, what was approved in total. So what we took out was the budget. So that 17,825 is the budget. 12.5 of that was for the garage, 5.2 for the streets, and then 125,000 for the parks, all associated with the project. So what we did was, since we appropriated it all at the last appropriations, we just took the entire budgeted amount out with this one.
Okay, I gotcha. Thank you. In section 7, paragraph 2, and I don't know if I'm just reading this wrong, but I don't understand it. It says, This change order, Park Enterprise Construction Company, included extra tree removal, additional excavation, additional stone and topsoil to bring the Rings Road ditch to grade, path elevation changes between driveways to avoid creature of areas for water to, I don't understand that sentence.
I may defer to our city engineer. Paul? Okay.
I think creature was probably supposed to be creation of areas for water to pond.
I figured it was a typo,
Okay.
but I didn't know if maybe that was just something I was just not aware of.
I saw creatures in ponds and thought it just made perfect sense.
Get a worm in a hook.
I know, right? Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm kind of hopping all over here. As I was reading through it, I was taking notes. So back to section 1. Were the high volumes of reviews not anticipated?
When we budgeted at the time, we weren't expecting it, and I think that's a piece as far as the increase in the credit card fees. I think that's a piece of it. So we didn't expect as large of an increase, but I think we're also seeing more people use credit cards, so that's a piece of it as well.
Oh, I see.
So we're seeing actually across the board in the entire city, our bank fees, our credit card fees go up in association with more people using credit cards. So a mixture of that.
Kind of double.
Yeah, so as we go into the next budget year, we'll definitely take a stronger look at that throughout the city.
I got you. So it's sort of more reviews, but also more credit cards being used.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, and that's all I have on that. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Chris?
I had a couple questions about these bank fees and the credit card fees. The $25,000 number seems really high for bank fees. What percentage are the bank fees of the $25,000 that were over anticipation? Section 1.
Of the total of the $25,000, what were the credit card fees associated with that?
Yes.
I don't have. I would say they were the majority, off the top of my head, but I don't know the exact amount. And obviously that's a percentage of the transactions for each one of those credit card fees, and it's not when we get that revenue in, we don't put a percent with it that is paid by the customer. So I don't have an exact number on how much of that $25,000 is credit card fees, but it's a large percent, and I think it's due to those factors that we just talked about.
So maybe when we discuss our fee schedules, oftentimes if you pay a bill by credit card, you pay a higher bill. And, I don't know that there's good reason for us to absorb all of those so that they can get, Delta miles. So, maybe when we reassess our fees, we look at one fee for a check or something of that nature, and then another fee if they're going to be using bank cards. Because I don't know where we are with this, but it's typically around 3%.
Right, and that's definitely, as we've gone through this. This year we're doing our large cost of service study in advance of the fee schedule. So it's something we've already discussed internally how we want to have that discussion. Obviously, that's something that would be brought to you all to discuss.
Anything else?
Yeah, I had a question on, I guess it is section 5. I was going to do it in roundtable, but since it's in here, I see the Highland Croy, the installation of that, the light and the turn lane. I remember when we discussed this before, I'm glad to see that it's moving here in the appropriation. The timing on that work was to begin in April. I don't see movement on that, so where are we on that?
Well, I guess if Paul wants to come up and answer that, I do know that we were suggesting that it could be as more like July.
Well,
that also was contingent upon the availability of the poles.
No, I think the discussion was that we were not going to hold up the turn lane in anticipation of waiting to put that light up. I mean, we had this discussion last time, so just
right.
And that.
I mean,
go ahead. Thanks.
They can't put the signal up until they actually have the hardware, and it has to go in fabrication itself. So, and I think part of it's been weather dependent as well.
But again, when we discussed it last time, that turn lane was going to proceed while because we knew there was a possible delay on that light, but that worked. But I've been by there, and That has not yet happened. Has that been programmed, or
Yeah,
when is
it's
that?
part of the project. They just haven't executed that component of the work yet.
Can you let us know when that date will be? Because, again, it was communicated, because this thing has changed a few times, and it was communicated
Right.
that it would start in April.
Yeah, it's the 9th of April, and I think with the week we had last week, they just
So it'll
didn't
be,
want to go
it'll
out
be in
there.
April?
Yeah,
I'm
that
seeing
was the
none.
original
Okay,
plan.
great,
So
thank
we'll
you.
confirm.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll see you back here on April 23rd. Thank you. The next three ordinances all relate to the Highland Croy Road Riviera Connector. I move that we waive the rules of order to discuss the ordinances 2918, 3018, and 31-18 together. Is there a second?
Second. Vice Mayor Ambrose-Crumb?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
And Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
And Ann, if you could just please read the names and the addresses of the property owners.
Right, ordinance 2918 relates to Sabra Minyard and William Minyard, located at 8698 Highland Croy Road. 3018 relates to Riviera Ventures LLC, the property is located east of Highland Croy Road along the proposed Catchio Lane. And 3118 is related to Elaine T. Hoare, trustee of the Elaine T. Hoare Revocable Trust, executed March 12, 2009. This is located at 8668 Highland Croy Road.
I'll introduce all three of those. Dana, Paul?
I'll take it. So the City of Dublin intends to construct the Highland Croy Road Riviera Connector. As the title suggests, this is a new public road connecting the Riviera neighborhood with Highland Croy Road. A site acquisition was programmed in 2017. Obviously, that's ongoing, as well as the Utility Relocation Construction Landscape Program for 2018. The need for the connector was identified as part of the traffic impact study when the Riviera development went through its process. And the street section will be 2 lanes with a center median and separated bike pedestrian facilities. If you're familiar with Churchman Road, that's a good example of how this road would be constructed. Obviously, the project requires acquisition of certain property interests, and the remaining properties involved in the project, regarding which staff has been unable to negotiate successfully, will involve separate legislation. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But these are cooperative residents, and one of which is donated, which we greatly appreciate. That's from the developer, and as it probably should be. But staff recommends adoption of ordinances 29, 30, and 31 at the second reading public hearing. And Paul has a graphic on the screen if you are not familiar with how the road lays out.
Questions from council? Kathy?
I just had a question, because I see the schools are in here, but they're not mentioned really. So what's the situation?
Yeah, so we're in discussion with the schools about that piece.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from council? Okay, we'll see you back here on those on April 23rd. Introduction public hearing on resolutions. Resolution 13-18.
Accepting the lowest and best bid for the 2018 street maintenance program.
Dana?
I'll introduce it.
Yes, so as you can see by the staff report, 5 bids were received, publicly opened and read for the 2018 street maintenance program. The engineer's estimate was $4.5 million. The budgeted funds for the 2018 street maintenance program and the 2018 capital improvement program are $5 million. You can see the bid tabulation in your staff report. I also would just mention that this work covers roadway resurfacing and reconstruction, base stabilization, spot repair, curb and gutter replacement, installation of ADA-compliant curb ramps where appropriate, and other associated work. Also, I'd mention that Rings Road west of Cosgrave Road will receive an improvement, and that's been selected to be a pilot section for cold in-place recycling, or CIR. There's a list of the streets proposed for improvement. The only other thing that I would like to add is that this bid came in very favorable compared to our budget, which is a good thing, but I also remind you we had a tough winter. And our streets have suffered more than probably what we would have anticipated. We have done a citywide assessment of that pavement. We will probably treat, because this bid is about unit costs, so we will probably spend more funding than what is shown here in some of those repairs, because we do have streets that are in more stress than we anticipated as a result of a tough winter. So staff will come up with a program to expend more of these funds to try to make some of those repairs.
Dana, I think it's great we saved 1.1 million there on that savings, but I have a question for you about, and this is because we're talking about street repairs and Paul's here. On the sidewalks, I noticed in walking that, and maybe this is because of the weather, you know how the sidewalks bump up because of the trees. Some of the repair on cement is being done with blacktop. Is that temporary, or is that the way we're going to be fixing them when we do this little, you know how you make it so that you don't trip over that?
It's just a temporary wedge of asphalt to take care of that irregularity.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. Thanks.
Dana, my next question was going to be adding some additional streets, because I know that we have, that list was long, so I appreciate that, that we're looking at doing different additions. Do you know, in terms of sidewalk maintenance, I just happened to be walking, I was, headed west through Old Dublin in front of largely the school's property to J. Lou's and some of those places there. Or do we have some repair money available for those? There was some significant deficiencies in those sidewalks there.
We did budget to step up our maintenance of sidewalks in the upcoming 5-year CIP. I think, Angel, Paul, that does kick off starting this year. Any comment, Paul, about sidewalk?
Yeah, I think it's $250,000 this year. We're just assembling that program as we speak, so it has not yet gone out to bid, but that will occur this year. So
I'd encourage you to look at that stretch from the veterinary hospital there up to the schools on the north side of the street headed west. Needs some attention through there.
Right.
Thank you.
And that's a great point, Councilman Brammer-Scrooms. I appreciate you bringing that up. And I would encourage our residents, and Paul, we do have this, if you see a situation, we try to get eyes on all of this. I think we do a pretty good job of that. But if you do see a situation that poses a hazard, please don't hesitate to email us or let us know and report that. That helps us out. So we would encourage our residents to do that.
So, Dana, can you just remind us again how the streets are selected for the maintenance process for resurfacing?
Sure. Paul, you want to speak to our inventory program and how we...
Yeah, it's actually through pavement condition ratings. It's done citywide. We just recently updated those. We also do testing as a result. Look at all that data through our infrastructure asset engineer, who is Bob Taylor, looks at that and then provides us with the programming of the streets. And then we are in engineering or in the implementation part of that, which is obviously assembling the plans, bidding it, and then the construction. So,
another question regarding the pilot road for the cold in place recycling. I'm sorry, excuse me. Do you know what the anticipated debris diversion is from doing that type of a program?
We don't. We can calculate it. I don't have it off the top of my head, but yeah, there is a material savings.
Yeah, I'm really curious to know what the diversion is from C&D landfilling it.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd just like to expand on Councilmember Aludo's question about our inventory. I would emphasize, we do inventory of sidewalks, we do inventory of our street pavements, we do inventory of our shared use path. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about that to our residents as well. And council budgeted positions to really focus on that so that we can stay ahead with a comprehensive inventory, a rating program, and go after and try to keep the highest level of maintenance we can on streets, sidewalks, parking lots, and shared use paths, so public parking lots. So we really work hard at that, and I really think we're seeing a good payoff with that program. Just an opportunity to brag about that process. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Okay, Ann?
Vice Mayor Ambrose-Grooms?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Ludo?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
And Mr. Keenan?
The next four resolutions, as they are now, this issue is dominating our agenda, are also related to the Highland Croy Road Riviera Connector. I move that we waive the rules of order to discuss resolutions 1518, 1618, 1718, and 1818 together. Is there a second?
I'll second.
A second.
Ann?
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Ms. Ludo?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose-Grooms?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes. And Ann, if you could please read the names and the addresses.
Sure. Sorry. 1518 relates to the Malik property located at 8640 Highland Croy Road. 1618 relates to Barbara Strobel and Lanny Strobel, and this is 8622 Highland Croy Road, and 1718 relates to Kevin O. Mullins and Jocelyn Mullins, 8600 Highland Croy Road. Sorry, and 1818 relates to Darshan Shaw, property at 8700 Highland Croy Road.
So this is the other side of the equation, Dana. These are the people that have not reached agreement?
Correct. I will not repeat all. It is the same project, as you mentioned, that we addressed previously with the ordinances. This is a resolution of intent or resolutions of intent regarding these properties. And I just would emphasize, this just really represents our intent to appropriate so that actions can be taken down the road. But, I want to assure council, as we always do, and our residents, that we work very proactively to try to find an amicable resolution to these acquisitions, and we'll continue that negotiation.
Thank you.
And staff recommends approval of these resolutions.
Any questions from council? Ann?
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Crooms?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
And Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Staff comments. Dana?
Yes, I've got a bunch, actually. So
Okay.
that came up fast. So first item is CODA board appointment. The city has been notified by Central Ohio Transit Authority, or CODA, indicating that 2 suburban appointments to the CODA board are set to expire, and it's now Dublin's turn to fill one of those 2 suburban appointments. I think it's an exciting time for Dublin to have a seat at that board, and I think it's terrific that council would consider it's a lot of work, taking the extra time to personally sit on that board. And what we're asking for is an appointment from council to that board. I also, a little bit different than what you've done in the past, I'm asking that you also appoint an alternate. This is not something that's required. The only reason I'm suggesting that is if for some reason whoever you select as council can't be there, or we need to fill a period of time. I just want to be able to say to CODA, we have a designee. If it's needed, may never be needed. I know I serve on a lot of regional boards where an alternate is suggested and or required. So I was just suggesting our Director of Development just as a matter of record. So.
Well, I would nominate Kathy DeRosa to serve on the CODA board, and Donna Goss to serve in her stead if she's not available.
I'll second.
Agree.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Crooms?
Yes.
And Mr. Keenan?
Okay, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Thank you, Councilmember DeRosa, for signing up for that. That's terrific. A few items under comments I'd like to just make here, or reminders. There's a resident meeting on 4/24/18, 6:30 to 8 p.m. at the Dublin Service Center on Shire Rings Road. This has to do with a water line replacement in the vicinities of Dunsketh Court, Springburn Drive West, McEwen Court, Bollock Court, Havington, and Ketchum Courts. Letters have been sent to the affected residents, and certainly hope that they'll attend that meeting and get more information. In your packet, there is a draft report regarding your council retreat. This is our best attempt to try to capture the outcome of that, as well as suggesting next steps. We can certainly talk about that here, or I recommend that you just, if you have comments, suggestions, we didn't capture something quite right, or you have other suggestions you'd like to consider under next steps, you can certainly send those to us between now and your next meeting. You can take those up now or whenever. I guess the thought would be, as has been council's tradition, we would finalize a report, and then council would adopt the report by motion, and then that would be our marching orders, if you will, collectively going forward. So any direction you want to give me on that would be appreciated.
Done.
Okay? Okay, great. You have a memo in your packet also about facilities programming analysis. As you know, the city has purchased the 5555 Perimeter Drive property. There is discussion about, has been discussion about what else to do with other city facilities and so forth. This step is just an interim step. I kind of look at it as a space allocation study and movement plan, so we kind of get a better understanding from a third party as to what things can start to look like and who might be where. So it's an internal discussion, and they will want to have a discussion with council members. We need to probably decide at some point if you want to do that individual or jointly or in groups, however you would like to undertake that. And that would be to get your feedback about the future City Hall and the future council chambers and things like that. There will be another process here, and that process would be to hire an architect who would then actually go under design. I would envision that process would have more of a public input process. For me, this is more about the analysis on pieces and parts and try to get an understanding of space allocation, and I think that helps to inform the future architect process as well. It'll also help us to understand a little bit more about cost, so as we're moving quickly towards another CIP process, I think it will help us to better understand some of those potential square foot type costs. So it's kind of a high level view of that, not intended to be the architectural design. That's yet for something that's another step into the future. So this helps to inform that process, if that makes sense.
What do you think that timeline is for you to have that study completed?
Yeah, well, I'm hoping, what were we saying? I think I told, ask Megan to have it done yesterday, but that probably doesn't work. So about 4 months, 5 months, something, yeah, that time frame. So maybe shorter, I hope. So.
She has to have everything done yesterday, though, right?
Yeah. Okay, so just want to explain what that was about. Also, there was a memo in your packet about the Bridge Street District background. Just wanted to share that with more so our newer council members about some of the development agreement and how that related to TIFs and payment to the schools and so forth. That's a pretty voluminous thing and something we haven't had the chance to talk about yet, but I thought I'd go ahead and just put it in the packet for all council members. Certainly, if you would like more one-on-one discussion on that or background, we'd be happy to accommodate that. Just let us know, and that goes obviously for anybody and everybody. I want to draw your attention also to a memo regarding 7455 Cosgray Road and the historic nature of that house. There doesn't appear to be interest in salvaging that or preserving the house unless the City of Dublin, you all, or Washington Township wants to do that. There was a sort of an architectural feature, namely the front porch, that seemed to have some significance to it. It's our intention to go ahead and move forward with the project unless we hear otherwise or receive different direction from you all.
I was by that this weekend, and there were lots of plywood over the windows. Did somebody come and reclaim some of the historic windows, or it appeared to be boarded up?
That was a result of the asbestos removal, but I don't know that the windows in it were actually
historical. Yeah, it was just to secure the facility after the asbestos removal. So they're actually plywooded from the inside.
Yeah.
But there's really, on the interiors, only the framing left. All the plaster was removed because that's what was asbestos containing. So.
I'm sorry, Chris.
Go ahead.
I have a comment on that, and it's just, it kind of goes back to looking at that historical and cultural assessment. I took a look at that on the appendix in there in that little house, and it is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Our community plan does call out for historic preservation of particular items like that kind of house. And so I'm asking council to consider really taking some time, a work session or whenever, to really create a policy on how the city impacts our historic treasures, I guess, because in many ways, as I look back, and I was on the Architectural Review Board, the things that were being brought down were not being brought down by private people, they were being brought down by us. And so I think that we need to have some policy to kind of understand how we look at whether or not we remove a stone wall, whether or not we actually move a historic house backwards in order to get a roundabout. Some of these things aren't salvageable, and I totally understand that, but I think unless we really take a good look about what we want to save and what we don't want to save, we'll find ourselves in, trying to explain ourselves later to people. So I would ask that maybe we schedule some time for that review of the historic and cultural assessment policy.
That's a great point. I appreciate that. And I think normally we would not have been involved in this project. We had agreed to take on, as council recalls, some of the funding, and we took on the engineering and management of the project. It's technically significant. A lot of it's not even in the city, so it could have been that could have happened without us knowing, and we wouldn't have tamped the brakes on it like we did. And I appreciate Tom Holton also raising that issue as well. Always appreciate his extra set of eyes on these things. So, and Tom, for our public, is with the Historical Society. So, again, our intention would be to move forward unless council wanted to give direction to preserve any portion of that. I think, about the only thing we could do is probably remove off the, either remove the whole house or you try to remove off that one architectural feature of the porch. I don't know if that sort of thing is, and store it. I don't know if that is feasible, but we could look into that if that's something you'd like us to do.
Sometimes when we have something like that come up, and we know that we're going to move it or we have to move it, to offer it for $1 to someone, to move it to a piece of farmland in order to preserve it, sometimes is a way to preserve things that we don't need, but we want to make sure that they stay standing. So that's where I think that discussion comes in. I think that we can think outside the box a little bit when it comes to that.
Well, then,
Or reclaiming parts of it. You know, there might be
Exactly.
somebody that would want to utilize a porch. Maybe they're doing a reconstruction to try to restore something to historical significance. Might find that useful.
okay, appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm going to keep rolling here. Just a couple more things. So the memo regarding solid waste services procurement, essentially, I won't reiterate all that the memo says, other than to say what we were asking is that as we go into this, we have the option to extend the existing contract yet another year, as we did this last year. Could be a good option for us as a city, but we'd also like to take a look at a redesign of that and a bidding process, and then get input from the public, and we'd like that to occur through the Community Service Advisory Committee, which has helped us in the past with these sort of things. So I'm asking for your referral of this topic to them so that we can take that up and try to use them as a sounding board and people who might come to that meeting to talk about that.
I personally think that makes a lot of sense. I know that our involvement in the consortium is something that saves us money over the long run. Anyway, I got a couple of phone calls, and kudos to Megan for how she's handling the whole process. The comments were that Megan's doing a great job working with SWACO on the solid waste contract. Dublin is a true leader in this realm and should definitely be in the recycling arena in Central Ohio. So great job. But I think it makes sense to take it to CSAC and get their input and their help on it.
So what kind of community feedback are you looking for?
We're looking primarily for feedback relative to the two-container type approach on collection, what that means for the public, how's that deployed. As we look at the costs associated with that, could be an increase to the contract. As you saw in the report, Solid Waste Advisory, SWACO is suggesting they change up their mix of how they package these, so we'll be looking at that with Washington Township and how we might package up a bid together. Joint bidding is good. The problem is joint bidding has become too big and too cumbersome for some of the companies to really respond to, so they're wanting to break that up a little bit. So some nuances in service and how that's delivered, and best to get feedback from those who get it. So.
Yeah, and
that we're seeing even with Columbus, right? They had only one bidder respond to their request. Is it right?
Right, which is what happened to us last year, and why we thought, well, we'll go with that, and then we'll redesign and then go back out to bid.
yeah, I saw in the survey results that this was highly positive, this particular service. So I think involving the residents, if there's some thinking about making change to that, would be an important thing, because it's well liked today.
Right.
The current process. Yep.
And just one other caveat to this whole thing is when you change up a bid like this, and we go to a two-container system as an example, and if that's how we go, the logistics of putting that in place is significant and takes a long lead time. So probably, extending the contract another year might be a good thing for the logistical system to go into place to put in a new contract. So those are the kinds of things that we need to think through and bounce off of our residents. So. Okay, so I'll take that as...
Do we need us to make a motion to refer that to? I move that we refer that SWACO issue to the Community Services Advisory Committee.
I'll second.
Ann?
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Keener?
Yes.
Keenan? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
And Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Okay, my last item, I promise. I just want to take the opportunity to personally congratulate the police department and the Northwest Regional Emergency Communication Center, NREC we call it, for their accreditation. What a great achievement, and I'm very proud, Chief, your leadership team, Chief, on getting that accomplished. Dublin's now one of only 42 agencies in the country holding a CALIA accreditation designation for both those agencies. Significant accomplishment. And, of course, getting accredited with lots of references to excellence and so forth is something we all like to see. and very proud of how that organization has gotten that done and what the tradition that has been. And Chief, I had this written down. How many times you've been reaccredited now? I'll let you say it. Ninth accreditation. And I'm sure many people are familiar with accreditation processes. They're not easy. They're painful. However, it's a standard bearer type of thing that we like to do. And not only is our police division and NREC accredited, but our Parks and Rec department is accredited. Our Public Works department is accredited. And I want to thank council for your support of that, because it is a huge effort. It does have costs associated to it, but it is a validation that we are doing things to a standard that is nationally accepted by all of our professional peers in all those areas that we operate. So I think those are the things that help contribute to the outcomes of like National Citizen Survey when we're trying to do things with excellence. So again, congratulations to the chief and his team and to the public for being supportive of that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Committee reports. The Community Development Committee, John?
Yes, tonight we had a meeting, Chris and Kathy and myself, to discuss the commercial facade improvement program. And in front of you, and I know you've read it, was the outline by the city staff, which is very well put together. We've decided they've done a really good job. We think there's some minor improvements, and they're going to come back to us and discuss those on a final report. So I don't know if you have any questions. We voted to go ahead with this. There are 4 applicants. 2 are doing minor things like window replacements, and 2 are thinking about upgrading their entire facades of their buildings. So should be a big improvement for the historic districts. Any questions?
I do, John. And they're not questions. There may be some suggestions to consider. And I'm sorry I didn't make the meeting. A couple of things. In talking to some folks, the Historic Dublin Foundation originally had requested that we look at ways to infuse money into the historic district to help with the maintenance. So in going back and looking through some notes and talking to some folks, I'm just going to make a few suggestions and see what y'all think about it. One of the suggestions on eligibility was maybe to apply this to buildings that are over 50 years of age, so that we don't use it for buildings that are newer construction. I know that there's a mention in there about new construction, but this is the standard for federal and state historic tax credits is over 50 years of age. So that's a suggestion that I would make. On the ground amount, maybe thinking about reducing it to $1,000, because some property owners or tenants might want to do a smaller project, and we only have $100,000, and when you go through 15 and 25,000 is the maximum, you may only get 4 people this year, whereas you might be able to spread that out a little bit, reducing that amount so that we have more people doing a little bit more down there. It's a thought. Doesn't have to necessarily be for all large-scale projects. It says something in there about making sure that your code and your projects are up to code currently, but possibly being able to take a look at people that are applying that are doing something that would bring it up to code still could be an allowable use for the money, because some people are struggling with that to get it up to code, and that money might help us get to that point. Let's see. It says something in there about not allowing for routine maintenance and repairs. I know that that's subjective, but also that is one of the problems we've had down there, is that we can't get people to do routine maintenance and repairs because they can't afford it, because they let them go and they let them go and they let them go. So I would suggest that maybe being able to use the money for routine maintenance and repairs should be allowed in the program. Obviously, all these things are going to go before reviews, and so we can pick and choose, but I think that might be beneficial. And also looking at it as maybe instead of just first come, first served basis, being able to put it out maybe on a quarterly basis, and whoever applies at that time, and especially if it's a lower amount, that money might not get used and gets rolled over to the next, and then towards you get to the end, if you still have a substantial amount of money, then a larger project would be allowed. But at least you're spreading this out over the years so that the smaller projects and more projects could be used. So I'm happy to share my thoughts with you, and once again, I'm sorry I didn't make it to the meeting, but I think it's something we can talk about.
Well, we've all agreed that we're going to increase the meetings dependent on how many applications we get. So instead of doing the twice annual meeting we've been doing on the city beautification program, we're going to now, whoever shows up, we're going to try to accommodate them. The one question that came up that was interesting was, since a lot of the properties are really owned by landlords and not the tenants who run the shops, there was some concern expressed on the fact that, do we want the taxpayers actually paying for somebody who's charging someone else rent to have their building tuck pointed, or, is that really, that's probably the person who owns the building who's leasing it to some other person's responsibility. So we did get into an entire discussion on that particular issue. But I think all your comments are very valuable, and we have them recorded, and they're going to come back with us and with some changes that we suggested, and then we'll talk about it further.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda was opening up the idea about creating a new standard and flag for the community. We suggested that this be opened up to everyone who might be interested, and to keep it simple, we decided that this might be a direction to go. We're going to have some more conversation about this. It would be totally anonymous. There'd be 3 envelopes. One envelope would have the design in it. A second envelope would have the designer in it, his name, and they'd all be placed in a third envelope. And we would have 2 people with a heraldic sort of background and a graphic designer be the judges. They would produce the which they thought was the best design. We'd like to see some more historic aspects of our city maybe displayed, either the Irish, German, farmland, corn, river kind of things on this particular flag. An interesting suggestion was made, this thing could be a lot of really ugly flags, and that's why we decided to sort of stay with more of the heraldic type of thing so it would be balanced and well executed. So we sort of decided that might be a fun thing to do, and found a whole lot of, basically we're getting down to the point where we think that the city has advanced to the stage where it's probably should have a banner that you really, is really so beautiful that you're going to fly it off your staff under the American flag or the state flag, or you're going to take it to a sporting event and you're going to be excited about it, and it sort of represents the community. So we're going to, that suggestion went forth, so I don't know if there's any comments on that or any other interest. And not being so, we will hopefully see that executed. Final thing was about a meeting with a real estate holder, and that's in process, and we're going to go ahead and do that. So that's the report. Thank you.
Hey, John, I wonder if putting money up for routine maintenance and repair might be counterproductive to our role to guard the taxpayers' money. I could see where that could be a lightning rod issue. I need some maintenance on my house probably, that, and I can see other taxpayers saying that as well as other business folks, so you might want to think that through more carefully.
Yeah, no, that was
the consensus.
That was the consensus, that we had to be very careful about that, because we don't want to take over somebody's maintenance role on a building that they're leasing out to someone else.
And then I wondered, as you had the discussion, there's some of those 1950s errors that would not, what would you say, 50-year window?
50 years.
So that's going to catch most of that
I think
over there.
everybody down there, almost everybody.
Because some of those buildings with the flat roof and 50s look, they could do some things that would really help it blend better in the district, I think.
Oh, absolutely, and I think in Westerville, they showed an example of that. I mean, even a 1950s building, you can change the entire front. And when it comes to the maintenance, I think it's also kind of addressed, and I think they addressed it in the facade thing, that if it's something that shows that it will maintain the property to a point that it won't fall down on itself. Sometimes we've got these ones that are so bad that some of the money will just shore it back up. I think that's a subjective thing. It's probably not going to be something that everybody's going to come and do, because there's obviously criteria, there's review, there's people taking a look at this, and we know the intent here is to improve facades and preserve. So they won't be the first things that we're going to give our money to, obviously, but I think there are going to be instances where there might be some flexibility in making sure that we don't let a building fall down on itself.
And Jane, to the point in the discussion, we talked about, because there is a wide scope of things that could fall potentially in this particular grant, and this is a pilot period, right? This is a year to find out what appetite there is and what works. But to set a criteria that, first and foremost, these are going to be considered first. Exactly. So we talked a fair bit about that as well, to make sure that we are getting, some more of the substantial, to do what was the intent, I think, of this pilot, and that is to really upgrade the facades down there. I agree. Yeah.
And another suggestion was that we would like these buildings photographed before they're renovated, so that we can have a sort of a case study and maybe encourage other people to do this and see where this money's really gone and how well it's done. So they're going to do a before and after, hopefully, with these projects. Thank you.
Okay, Jennifer, do we need a motion adopting that committee's report?
Approving the recommended process.
Okay, I make a motion that we approve the process that John and his committee have recommended.
I'll second.
Ann?
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Amorose Grooms?
Yes.
P&Z, Jane?
We had a training session at the last P&Z meeting. It covered ethics, legal, planning processes, and Chris gave a talk as the admin chair on council policy. So I thought it was excellent, very well done, and very thorough, especially for me, brand new. I learned a lot. I would make a couple additional suggestions on education for other boards. I'm looking for more frequent workshops and speakers. I think the more that we educate our commission members, the better they are at it, the easier the job is, and the better outcomes we get. I'd like to see a little bit further training on incorporating the intent and vision of the community plan as we look at development as these applications come through, to make sure that that's always the umbrella or the color glasses that we look through when we're doing some perusal of these plans. Also, a little training I think that might be helpful, and Kathy, you were on the board, many of you were on the board before, and you speak to this. Maybe the board's role in preparing and recommending land use plans and rezoning recommendations and zoning code amendments and legislative recommendations, because so often we just simply look at the applications, but the board has a much broader responsibility to council, and sometimes I think that we could use a little education on how we go about using those powers in the right way, so that we can serve the council the best way we can. And then also instructions on, and this is probably coming from someone who hasn't been on the board very long, understanding when you use variances, when you look at administrative appeals, conditional uses, a little bit better, a little more in-depth on that I think is something that would be helpful. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say about planning and zoning, but very good, and thank you so much for all the help you all did on that.
Thank you, Jane. Admin, Chris?
We've got reviews to get done, and we need to move forward on that. I received a research document from some of our staff this week about how best practices are going about that. I'll forward you that document tomorrow, and we can start evaluating how we want to go about doing our reviews, because there's certainly a number of good ways to do them.
Finance, Mike? Public Services, Christina?
We will have our first meeting on the 30th of this month, so Jane and John, that's you two, just in case you didn't remember.
Yep.
Meeting on the 30th.
30th.
Yep. Public Services Committee, and Michelle, I'll be reaching out to you. And I already have some information from Michelle, so I'm kind of excited to get that group kicked back off again.
It's at 5, right?
Friendship Association?
Nothing. We meet, is it tomorrow? Next week? Hold on. I wrote it down. Oh, right. We did meet, and we talked about, sorry.
Oh.
I had my head in two different places. We actually talked about following up with Tim Sword with the Greater Columbus Sister Cities, and that's who we're meeting with tomorrow. See, I knew I had a meeting tomorrow. To talk about ways that we can collaborate and leverage some of the things that they're doing and that they have, as well as them working with us and leveraging some of the things that we have as well. So I'm really excited about that meeting. We'll have more after we talk with Tim.
Thank you. Morpsey, Chris?
We have not met since we were last together. We do meet this Thursday, 1:30 in the afternoon.
Logan Union Champaign County Regional Planning Commission, Kathy.
Nothing to report.
How about the U.S. Innovation Corridor Group?
We meet Friday.
Okay, let us know how that goes. Dublin Arts Council, John?
Congratulations to the Dublin Arts Council on the full-page story on Sunday for their latest art exhibition. How they do it, it's a very small little facility, but they're always in the news and always pulling the great rabbit out of the hat, and some exciting things to go see. So congratulations to them. And a final advertisement on May the 4th, the garden party, which is the major fundraiser for the Dublin Arts Council. It's always a great time. Great food and good friends. So try to make it.
May 4th, is that like, it's usually a Friday, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it Friday? Thanks, John. Board of Education, Christina?
We will meet this Wednesday.
Washington Township. Chief, Eric, you got anything? All right. Council Roundtable, Jane?
Well, we talked about an awful lot of it already, so I don't have too much more, but one of the things that I'm looking forward to is getting together in our workshop and talking about the community plan and that sort of thing. I did mention at the last meeting a concern that I had about, and I mentioned it again tonight a little bit, about how the city, when you bring things into the historic district, or you move things in the historic district, or you bring new items in the historic district, that it probably should go through some policy of the ARB or whatever. And I don't think we went very far with that, but I would ask that on the agenda of our community workshop, as we talk about the historic district, that might be an item that we discuss. And then I want to thank Mayor Peterson's wife, Sunny, for filling in for me on the dodgeball tournament. And so that
a whole heck of a lot of good, didn't it?
She did a great job, and I appreciate that. And and my husband wanted everyone to know that he was really appreciative that he didn't have to use his emergency medical bag.
Thank you, Jane. Kathy?
I was kind of hoping we'd go the whole night without discussing that. It was 90 seconds of glory, I think, is about what that turned out to be. So, yeah, that was a lot of fun, though. So,
Yeah, this coming from the last woman standing. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it was something. That's the only word we should use for it, something. And I'm sure if there's any film, it is no longer in existence, right? The darndest thing happened to that film. I just had a couple of things. One, sort of Dana Beck, I just wanted to make sort of a general comment about the council retreat documents, and then we'll follow up specifically. I appreciate, there was a lot to put down in the documents in summary, and so I appreciate that work. I think, and almost across the board, I think it would be helpful if we could be a bit more explicit about what the next step is and some timelines. And I know we can't do everything at once, which is why I think it's important to do that in those documents, because as I read sort of through the next steps, a lot of it was suggestions that we should schedule a roundtable or we will get documents together. But I think it would be helpful to put some more timelines and some time frames around those sort of across the board. And then I had some, certainly specific topics on some things that we'll reach out individually. But I just think to make it an actionable document, I think it's important to put some more time frames on that. So
I snuck a few deadlines in there, but
that's what I'm looking for.
But you want them on every one of them.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know that. I just think, but it's helpful because there's a lot there, and they're large projects, and I think for us to adopt, I think it's quite helpful for us to be.
That's
able
great.
to
I think too, some of those lend themselves to sort of incremental or phased pieces, and we'll give that some thought and maybe put some time frames on those as well.
Yeah,
I think that's where it got hard, is these things are pretty big processes, and how do we break them down? So we'll give that some more thought.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then I'll ask my colleagues here, as we're going electronic. This was sort of our first test of the electronic documents. And I would just make one suggestion or comment. Having served on the Planning and Zoning Commission and went electronic for a while, I very much liked how we had the whole document together, but then we also had individual documents under folders, and I just think it's very hard to try to navigate through all of that. So I might suggest that we look at how the Planning and Zoning Commission distribute some of that electronically, because I think that actually worked quite well to model. And I know this was sort of our first test, and
Right.
I
We did
give
talk
myself a
about that.
C minus. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks.
John?
I want to thank you, Mayor Peterson, because the dodgeball tournament, even though it wasn't our hour of shining glory, embarrassment might be a better term, but it did raise $13,000, which was huge for one evening of fooling around in a gym. It was really a great thing. So, thank you. And I have the same comments that Kathy has on the retreat, that I'd like some timelines put on some of those items so we can know when we can expect their completion. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Michael? Nothing? Christine?
Thanks. It was 15,000.
Whoa.
Yeah. I wanted to just follow up, Michelle, with you. I talked to a couple more residents who are really, really excited about the aging in place work that we've sort of started. And I know that you and Christine were going to follow up and sort of try to capture everything from the summit. And I was just curious on when you might have that ready for review.
We were planning on getting that out to the participants sometime this week, and then we'll bring to your committee of council sort of a timeline for some of those other conversations that we want to have with caregivers and older residents and HR professionals, those types of things. So
That's great. Thank you so much. And Chief, welcome to your newest officer, Finn. That's very exciting. Congratulations. And then I already thanked Megan, so I'm good.
Chris?
I have a couple things. I, too, am struggling through this electronic packet, so I may be the slowest one to acquiesce to a position of proficiency, but I will do my darndest. I, too, echo the thoughts about the minutes from, or the notes from our retreat. I think this is a tremendous amount of effort went into this. It's certainly a good first look, and I think that it probably warrants a few other looks. I wanted to talk briefly about, oh my goodness, the facilities programming analysis, space planning, and master plan for Dublin's Civic Campus. Specifically, the second paragraph there, it talks about a master plan outlining a phased logical progression of implementation, addressing design and construction of renovations, buildings, and relocation efforts. Are we looking, this architect that Meachman Apel folks that you've put on this, they're not looking at constructing the building. They're only looking at constructing perhaps the council chambers piece, but not the building that would replicate the services in 5800.
I think part of that, we're going to have them take a look at the square footage allocation on the site, are we not, Megan? I think that's a very preliminary view of that.
Yeah, their scope is merely conceptual planning level scope. There's no design or architectural services that'll be included in their scope.
Okay.
So it's all conceptual. Where would a building be placed on the site? How many buildings? That kind of thing.
Okay. I just want to make sure we don't get too far down that road, because I think that we probably have some policy discussions to have before we would move on that. So I get putting a rectangle on the drawing, but much more than that I think might be a bit premature. Let's see, I already talked about the boarded up windows and CSAC seeing that. I received some pictures and a call from residents about the park on the East Side Park, the Kosciuszko work being done in that park over there, tree removal, and the pictures that I saw spurred me to visit, and it's a pretty gnarly site over there. So I'm wondering what our end goal is there, and where are we in the progress. I laid eyes on it this weekend, and it didn't look like something that was finished.
Yeah, that's not finished. The first attempt was to remove all of the honeysuckle and the invasive species that you saw there on site. It is not an attractive site once we complete that, but then we'll go back in and we will replant where necessary as far as, putting some of that vegetation back in. I'm not really familiar with the final plan, but I can get that to you.
Okay, because there's, 4 foot high stumps things sticking above ground, and it looks like maybe they went through with a brush hog or something of that nature, and it was really wasn't really a honeysuckle thin. It was a clearing of the understory in its entirety, where there were a lot of 3-4 inch caliper trees that came down with it as well.
Let me do some more research on that, and I'll get back to you.
Thank you for that. Okay, I already talked about the Swaco pickup. Oh, and there was some mention about the under special projects of the historic and cultural assessment. When it was, I think it was in the summary of the ARB from 2017. And it talks about, it says, I'll read the last sentence. It talks about City Council accepted the assessment at the September 25th, 2017 meeting. And I don't want that story to end there. That it was something that we accepted on September 25th, 2017. I was hopeful that we would see more things coming back from that historical assessment document, and different historical amenities, much to Jane's point, that we were going to be pursuing, and I'm hoping that that's an active document and not a study that's complete.
Yeah, I would hope any and all of those plans are living documents. They don't sit on the shelf. Let me go back and check the minutes of that and clarify what the direction was going forward. I'll get that information back to you.
Thank you.
And of course, if there's other direction, obviously we can pick that up and run with it.
Okay. Finally, I wanted to give a report. We had a Dublin Community Foundation board meeting last week. They were reviewing several, 4 grants for this grant cycle, and we had some really great grants of folks that are wanting to do tremendous things in the community. So once those are approved, I'll bring back the grants that were in fact approved and give you a little information about that. I wanted to congratulate the Next Gen Chamber of Commerce leadership class. I gave out their awards to them last week, and they really sharp group of people and fun to see the next group of leaders. And I wanted to thank you for Claudia and all the planning staff for putting me on the Planning and Zoning Commission training agenda, and I really enjoyed having the opportunity. The message that I sent on behalf of all of you was that we feel Dublin has held a very high standard to this point, and we expect them to take that baton and continue and make Dublin a better place after their service than it was before. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. 3 very quick things. First, the Hadakas, if you are fortunate enough to get an invitation to the Hadakas Cherry Blossom Luncheon, that is this Friday, go. It is one of the Hadaka USA. I know several of us went on a tour of that facility. Really just a phenomenal company. And the Hadakas are one of the most wonderful couple you will ever meet. And they put on such a fantastic luncheon for the city of Dublin. It is all in recognition of their relationship with this community. And so if you're lucky enough to get one of those gold tickets, make sure you go. The Arbor Day celebration thing, they did this in my park, in my neighborhood park last year, and it is well worth going to. Even if you live in Amberley, go, and if you don't, go anyway. They teach you how to prune, and they teach all the stuff that you guys know about agriculture and landscaping and all that stuff. They pass out trees. It's a really great program that our staff puts on. And finally, the dodgeball. I know that this was somewhat of a harebrained idea, but I can tell you we stood around for about an hour or so waiting for our turn to play. And for the 90 seconds of our actual competition, which is maybe using that term way too loosely, it went quickly. But I can tell you this, it was the right image, it was the right message to send for us to be out there. John always talk about physical fitness, and we got all these bike paths and everything else. For us to be out there as a group actually participating in these things was a very good message to send. And I can also tell you that Dr. Hoadley and the staff really appreciated us being there. I know that he was very, very sincere in his appreciation, so I'm glad that we were able to give him that kind of support. And I am going to try, and I don't know if my goal is going to be once a month, but maybe it'll be every other, to come up with something that I suggest we go do as a group that is in this same vein. I know John's talked about us going kayaking and different things like that. So I think that we got to put our money where our mouth is, and actually, you're not going to show up, Mike.
Bike
I'm
month.
trying.
The oldest first.
Mike, we need some new members.
Greg, Bike month kickoff is coming up, and it's, there we go.
You know what? When do we get those bikes? Does anybody know when we get those bikes that are? May 5th is when we're going to have these bike racks. So maybe shortly thereafter we can take a tour somewhere on the new bikes. I think would be a great idea. So I'll try to pick out a day for us to do that. That's all I have. Jen, do I need to make a motion to go back to executive session?
Yes,
All right.
for the reasons that are listed.
I make a motion we return to executive session to consider the purchase of property for a public purpose and for a conference with an attorney for the public body concerning disputes involving the public body that are the subject of pending or imminent court action. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ann?
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
And Ms. Fox?
Yes.
We will not return.